Hey, everybody, this is Michael Sweet of Stryper, and you are listening to Thunder Underground.
Welcome to episode 404 of the Thunder Underground podcast. And this is not an error. Get it? 404 error? Yeah. Michael Sweet of Stryper is here for the first time. Michael Sweet is, of course, one of the greatest voices of the 80s when it comes to hard rock. And I wouldn't even, I would put that well past the 80s just of all time when it comes to rock. And he's displayed that more than a lot of people, because still to this day, if you get the chance to see Stryper live, you're going to see someone at the top of his game, 40 years after this band was making its name. So we're going to talk with Michael about Stryper's brand new album and about a lot of other stuff, and that is coming up here very shortly. But first, I need to let you know who sponsors this podcast. Sunset Tattoo is a tattoo shop located in Midtown Tulsa. Their tattoos are done good and proper. They're state licensed. They've got well over 25 years of experience, Native American owned, and there is a female artist on staff full time. So if you have an idea, or if you don't have an idea and you're looking for someone to help you with said idea, hit them up. Call, email, walk in. They can sit down and work with you, whatever idea it is that you're looking for. There's tons of photos on their social medias for you to look at. Facebook and Instagram are both Sunset Tattoo Tulsa. I've had work done by Jake at Sunset Tattoo more than once, and I'm extremely happy with it, and I'm going to have it done here again in the future. I know many other people that have as well, and I'm sure that once you hit up Sunset Tattoo, you'll be happy with the work that you get done as well. So hit them up and tell them you heard about them right here on Thunder Underground. We've also got DEB Concerts, a concert promoter based right here in Tulsa as well. They've brought so many great acts over the last many years to downtown Tulsa at the club level, at the arena level, and they also book the Roadhouse DEB concert stage at Rocklahoma every year. Rocklahoma just happened, not this past weekend, about a week and a half ago. Excellent as always out there at the Roadhouse stage. Some great sets from Winger, Tom Kiefer, Atomic Punks, great friends of this podcast, in Dime Store Riot, Enough's Enough, Eyebolt. It's a very long list. And another successful year from DEB Concerts at Rocklahoma. Next year, in 2025, I'm sure we'll be talking about that once again. But coming up here on November 30th, the Cancer Sucks event, which will be, let me check, 18th annual. I knew it had been going on quite a while. I remember going to those very early ones. I believe they had a couple out at Curly's. Does anybody in the Tulsa area remember Curly's? I'm sure you do if you've been around here a while and you love rock and roll and live music. But anyway, Cancer Sucks for the last many years has been at the Cain's Ballroom. Same as it's going to be this year, November 30th. Stephen Piercy will be headlining this event. Of course, Stephen Piercy is the vocalist of Rat. He's going to be out there playing all the Rat tunes you know and love. Quiet Riot will also be on the bill. Always, anytime I mention Quiet Riot, I've always got to throw in love for the drummer, because Johnny Kelly, of one of my all-time favorite bands, Typo Negative, has been the drummer of Quiet Riot now for a few years. This is going to be an excellent show. Both of those are great live bands. That's all I need to say. You need to get out there, check this out. It's going to be a blast. And of course, it's for Cancer Sucks. So this is a great cause, a great benefit here in the Tulsa area that has been going on for, like I said, 18 years. Rick Horton has been putting on these amazing shows. So look forward to this. Get out there, check this out. Hit up DEB Concerts at debconcerts.com. Also on their socials, Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram are all DEB Concerts. Look them up, follow them, and of course, same thing. Let them know you heard about them right here. All right, so I just mentioned Rocklahoma. Before I get into this talk with Stephen, I almost said Stephen Piercy because I was just talking about Rat. Before I get into this talk with Michael Sweet of another great band of the 80s, talk a little bit about Rocklahoma. I don't do Rocklahoma reviews anymore. I haven't for the last, 3 years. The last time we really did one was the last time Jason was still on this podcast and went to Rocklahoma, because, for the last many years I've been working Rocklahoma, and I usually only get a chance to see, bits and pieces of some sets, but there's always a couple sets that I make sure, I get the chance to see a full thing. And this year, that's what I'm going to talk about. I'm just going to talk about a couple separate performances. But first, I want to let you know I did see, I think, the last 2 or 3 songs of Winger. I saw the very beginning and the very end. There's not much to say because I've spoke many times throughout the past 9.5 years of this podcast how much I absolutely love Winger. Reb Beach has been on this podcast before. He's one of my all-time favorite guitarists. This band is so wildly underrated in the sense of all the people, that kind of started ragging on them in the 90s and never let up. So if you're one of those people, you have to go back and give this band another chance. Their newest album from last year, 7, phenomenal. In my opinion, it's, everything they've done is great. I've loved every album, but I think it's the best thing they did since Pool back in the 90s, early 90s, 93. They've got all original members. It's a fantastic show. We're talking musicianship at the highest level, and that never changes. So, Winger, absolutely phenomenal. But the 2 artists that I got to see full sets from, first one is another band that has been brought up on this podcast many, many, many times throughout the 9.5 years. In fact, 2 of the members of this band have been on this podcast. Clutch is who I'm talking about. Neil Fallon, the vocalist, and Tim Sult, the guitarist, have both been on this podcast separately. Both of those were back when Jason was still doing a podcast with me. Talking to Neil Fallon was a highlight to me of the 9.5 years of this podcast. I consider him to be an all-time frontman, that doesn't get his due in that respect. I consider him to be literally one of the greatest lyricists in the history of rock and roll. I'm not just saying that because it sounds good. I'm saying that's the way I feel. I put him up there with a Neil Peart or Chris Cornell or anybody else that's known for writing great lyrics. Whoever your favorite is. If you're not familiar with Neil Fallon's lyrics, or you've just heard a couple Clutch songs, just pull some lyrics up and read them. The guy's a master of expression, in my opinion. So with Clutch at Rocklahoma, they headlined the second stage on one of the nights, and it was phenomenal because I don't know if Clutch has the ability to put on a performance that's not phenomenal, because I've seen these guys many, many times throughout the years, dating back to, I believe, maybe their first tour or second, because it was 90. Their first album was 94, right? And let me see, I think it was 94, maybe it was 95, but I saw them opening up for Prong at the Canes, and that was before I even really knew much about them, didn't really care. But within a few years of that, I just kind of latched onto it because I had friend like Michael Thrasher, a good friend of mine that's been on this podcast before. He, was a massive fan and I kind of got into him through that way, and, I've never let up. And all the performances I've seen throughout the years have always been special. This one to me was very special because Clutch played their album Blast Tyrant in its entirety. This year is the 20th anniversary of Blast Tyrant that came out in 2004. And they've been touring, playing this album in its entirety. And I know, a lot of shows or a lot of festivals these days, the last 3 or 4 years, it's usually at the bigger ones where, they have the massive wide lineups like, Louder Than Life or Welcome to Rock, all the DWP festivals or, Blue, the ill-fated Blue Ridge Rock Fest. All those would have stacked lineups with, 100 bands plus on them. So there would always be like special sets, so-and-so performing this album in its entirety. And you see it sometimes it's usually from larger bands. You don't see it a lot from bands at the level of Clutch, at least from what I've noticed. I'm sure it's out there, I just haven't really noticed. But I think it's pretty ballsy to, when you're headlining a stage, to go out there and just straight up just perform an album in its entirety. For most bands. But again, we're talking about Clutch. If someone's a casual fan or doesn't really know what they're getting into and think they're going to hear the 3 or 4 Clutch songs they know at any show, they're probably wrong, because Clutch is one of those bands. There's not a lot of them out there. You could name them, on 1 or 2 hands, less than that for sure. Bands like Pearl Jam and Black Crowes a long time ago and stuff like that, to where every single show there's a lot of jam bands that obviously do that, but at least in the rock world, not many bands go out there and every single show, the set list is different. So Clutch went out there and played an album in its entirety that literally just has like one song that the average hard rock fan, metal fan might know, which is The Mob Goes Wild. Well, it's the album Blast Tyrant also has The Regulator on it, which is, a fairly well-known song in the world of Clutch. But for those people that aren't diehard fans, that's just why I think stuff like that is ballsy. But again, it's Clutch. I think most people know what they're going to get, and that they're one of those bands that even if you didn't know the song coming up next, it's not going to bore you, that's for sure. And, getting to hear stuff like Cypress Grove, and there's a couple other songs that, obviously several songs you don't hear that often, even from a band that is always mixing it up. For me, it was beautiful because, Blast Tyrant is one of their best albums. It's one of the best album titles of all time, in my opinion. And so just to be able to see that and see Clutch put on another fantastic show, you could see there was a lot of people in the crowd that, were just kind of there to, party and crowd surf. But, that's great too, because, hopefully they heard something that turned them on to Clutch, turned them on to that genre of rock. But I also saw many, many diehards singing along to every song, which is a beautiful thing to me, no matter what the show is, but especially when it's a band like Clutch. It just, without sounding corny, it touches my soul. So, I was so happy to be able to get that moment in time to be able to stand there and watch that full set. So kudos to Clutch for doing what we knew they would do and knock it out of the park. Next up, well, side note real quick, they're touring with Rival Sons now, which to me, I can't even fathom. Being able to walk into a club and see Clutch and Rival Sons in the same night. Two of the greatest live bands of this century. I don't say things like that loosely. I know I say amazing or great or one of my favorites, a lot, as most people do, but Rival Sons is absolutely probably the best rock band to debut in the past 15 years. They're a phenomenal live band. And like I said, Clutch is an all-timer live band in my opinion as well. So if you get the chance to see that show, do not miss it. All right, so the other band that I got the chance to see the full set from was Any Given Sin. Now, Any Given Sin isn't a household name in the world of rock yet, but I'm thinking and hoping that maybe here within an album or so, they might be. They're on the right track. They've got the right sound. I think they're heading in that direction. Any Given Sin has now been around for, I don't know when they debuted, but I know they had an album come out, I believe 2016, 2017. Their most recent album came out last year. This band, to me, they were they're, like I said, one of the two bands I made sure I saw the full set of because I've really gotten into them this past year, probably early this year. I'd seen the name for quite a while, but just something I hadn't looked into. And one day on Sirius, I believe it was on Sirius. It could have been on Spotify, like, an artist radio type thing. But one of those situations, I heard Any Given Sin Dynamite. And the song blew me away. So I looked into them. The whole album blew me away. Then I went back into their older stuff, which has a slightly different sound, a slightly different feel. But that blew me away as well. And this band, they very much fit into the mold of those, Octane style, Octane style radio bands. When I say Octane, that's a station on Sirius, but the radio rock metal where it's kind of like blurring the lines of heavy metal and hard rock. You hear, bits and pieces of different bands. I've heard people compare his voice to Brent Smith of Shinedown. But I hear that at times, but it's not consistent because this band pulls in elements of different bands, but they do not sound like anyone specific all the time, which is exactly what you want as a band. They recently also released a cover of Cutting Crew's I Just Died in Your Arms Tonight, which, translated very well to a heavy genre. And they played that live at Rocklahoma, and the crowd was really into it. And I noticed the crowd when they played Dynamite. There was a pop, and you could see that people knew the song, so that was very positive to me. And they played the songs like Another Life and Insidious and, everything, several other songs in their new album that was just so cool to be able to see these guys and see them pull it off live. That's what I was hoping. I hadn't really even watched live videos of them, so I was just hoping that they were a great live band. They absolutely were. Had a great live presence, and to me it just looked like four guys that absolutely loved what they're doing, and that, maybe in a couple years, if they're back at Rocklahoma, they'll be going on later in the day because they're starting to pick up steam. And that's what I think will happen. That's what I hope will happen. So I implore you to check out Any Given Sin if you have not yet. All right, one more thing. Another concert I want to talk about. Creed. Yep, I said Creed. I have always unapologetically and unabashedly loved Creed. They're one of those bands that so many people are very divisive on, like the same as they are with Nickelback or, Five Finger Death Punch or whoever. Both of those bands I'm indifferent towards. But Creed I'm not indifferent towards. Since they debuted, I absolutely loved them. Loved all three of those albums. And of course I followed them to Alter Bridge. Absolutely love Alter Bridge, as I've spoken about throughout the years. I loved when Creed got back together 12 years ago, and I love the fact that they're back together now. So, with all that being said, Scott Stapp sounded great. Absolutely great. You know that those other three guys sound great because Alter Bridge has been doing this Scott Stapp's been doing this endlessly as well, but I'm just saying that a lot of people have seen Alter Bridge live and know what those three guys bring to the table. So if you had any doubt or wonder and you hadn't paid attention to Scott Stapp in the solo world, he still sounds great. These songs sounded great. The house was packed. That's what is great to me. They were massive, when they came out. So it's not any wonder that, they're filling up places. But they are absolutely selling out every night. They're playing amphitheaters, the whole 12, 15,000 people and selling the places out. They had that cruise that was announced that they sold out very quickly and then added a second one. That's how much the demand was. So to be able to witness this live, I saw them on their last reunion 12 years ago. They played Rocklahoma as a headliner. I got to see that set, and then I saw them several times back in the late 90s, early 2000s. I just love, and their set, of course, was just, stock full of every Creed hit that there is, as well as, many of the deep tracks. And, just to see them play these songs that I absolutely love, like What If, which is my favorite Creed song ever. Are You Ready, which is another one right up there. One, those are probably my top three right there. They played all those. They played all the hits like Higher and One Last Breath and My Sacrifice and With Arms Wide Open, My Own Prison. I'm sure I'm forgetting something else. They open with Bullets, which is an absolute fabulous song. Just an awesome set. What you expect from that type of rock band, that arena rock, hard rock style band. Full of massive screens behind them, full of fire, full of lights. Just an arena show in the amphitheater. And then speaking of arenas, once this amphitheater run ends here, I believe later this month, they are kicking off a run, or I don't know, jump back if I just said amphitheater ends here in September. They're kicking off an arena run on November 2nd in Oklahoma City as the first stop at the Paycom Center, the arena where the Oklahoma City Thunder play. And then they're playing a bunch of arenas for a couple months. So you've got another chance to see Creed. The show also featured Daughtry, which put on a good show. I've always been kind of indifferent towards Daughtry, but I will not shy away from the fact that he's got a great band and he sounds great live. And everybody seemed to be into it as well. I'm not real familiar with most of his music. I recognized 2 or 3 songs that I didn't realize I knew of Daughtry, and then he played his cover of Separate Ways that came out last year that they did with Lizzie Hell of Hellstorm. Of course, she wasn't there, but, me and my friend Dustin, who was, there with me as well, he was saying, wouldn't that just be spectacular if for some magical reason, Lizzie Hale appeared from the sky in all her glory, and we got to hear that. But of course, that did not happen. That was a pipe dream, right? So, but I should also mention that Finger 11 opened this show. Finger 11 is a band that I upfront admit I never really I'm not going to say I never got into. I never looked into outside of the two songs. All over the radio when they came out. Paralyzer, was one of the biggest hits of the early 2000s. Everybody knows that song. And then they had the big ballad hit, One Thing. Those were the two songs I knew. But I had been told by a friend a few years ago that he saw Finger 11 and he's like, man, you got to check these guys out live if you get a chance. They're just a really good live band. They come off heavier than you expect, I guess. And that's exactly what happened. I was just kind of surprised about how heavy they were. And they're so energetic. The bass player and the guitarist, or one of the guitarists and the bass player, were all over the place, extremely active. It's like you're watching a hardcore band or something from the 90s. They're just going nuts, just having the time of their life, and the singer very much commands the stage. So I was very happy, because we all know as we get older, we get a little jaded to things. We're like, well, I'm just here to see Creed. I don't care, who's opening, even if, I know them, I'll know Paralyzer or whatever, but you sit there and watch it. So I was just so happy that I got to see that and, fall in love with the band that I didn't really know I needed to be in love with, right? So there you go. If you have never seen Finger 11, you get the chance. It's 2024, which means it's never too late, my friends. Okay, now it's time to jump into this talk with Michael Sweet of Stryper. Michael Sweet is one of those guys, like I said at the very beginning of this, that has never lost a step, in my opinion. Guys like Bruce Dickinson, Rob Halford, Mike Patton. I mean, I know there's other ones that just aren't popping in my head that I talk about, throughout the years that, hit those high notes, where a lot of guys like, say, Joe Elliott from Def Leppard, has toned his voice down, so you don't have to hit those high notes, which I always appreciate. But Michael Sweet is not one of those guys that has ever had to, drop a register or not try to hit notes he used to hit. And, you listen to these albums, you hear it, but that doesn't always mean it's going to be the same way live. It's been at least 2 or 3 years since I've seen him, but I've seen him live several times in the past decade, and it's just so good. And speaking of the past decade, every album they've put out has just been so good. That's something we speak about, that their modern albums, are a lot heavier as a whole than the early Stryper albums, which is something else I implore people to check out. Because it's just, they were always heavy, but they're heavier now. And you hear that on this newest album. This newest album has some kind of throwback sounds, and that was an intentional thing that we talk about as well. But it kicks off with End of Days, which, if you listen to that and don't think it's just great heavy rock or heavy metal, you're just, something's wrong with you, I think. So, and Michael Sweet has done so much. He's so prolific as far as recording music and getting out there and doing this stuff. We talk about his band with Tracy Gunn, Sunbomb. Of course, his band with George Lynch, Sweet and Lynch, which is unbelievable. The 3 albums they've done, man, I wish that would go on tour one day and I would get the chance to see Sweet and Lynch live. Absolutely, He did an album with the band Iconic a couple years ago. He's got a multitude of solo albums. This guy is always doing stuff. And then, of course, Stryper's newest album, When We Were Kings, came out just this past Friday. So if you haven't heard that yet, do that as soon as this interview is over. Which, speaking of, I'll stop talking and let Michael Sweet start talking. So here we go. Here's Michael Sweet of Stryper. You've been outside in the rain?
Yeah, it's been pouring here all morning, and I got pretty wet. That's why I have my hat on. My hair is soaking wet, but I'm doing good. I'm in a dry place now, little cabin we're staying in, and we're having fun, man. It's a cool place.
Well, I appreciate you taking the time with me today.
Of course.
Cool. Well, just kind of jumping into it. When We Were Kings, it's coming out next month. You've got, three singles out so far. Grateful has been talked about, for its throwback vibe, but like, how would you describe this entire album to someone that hasn't heard it yet?
Yeah, it's you know like every Stryper album, it's very eclectic. There's something for everyone on it. You've got the heavy side, like End of Days. So for all the metalheads, that song, Imperfect World, um, maybe even Trinity. There's a handful of songs that people will love that love metal. And then there's the songs like Grateful, which is the other side of the fence. I mean, definitely not a metal track, still edgy, guitar based oriented song, which is what we're all about. But the reason why we've always mixed it up on every album we've ever done is because we grew up on bands like Maiden and Priest. We would listen to that stuff for an hour or two or three, and then we would drop in a Journey album or Loverboy album, Survivor. The more melodic, uh, little on the lighter side music. So those are our roots. We love those bands and appreciate them just as much as we did Dio or Halford, you name it. So yeah, and that's why you get what you get with Stryper. And some people complain about that. They're like, all metal or all ballads. There's no middle ground, so it seems. But we just do what we want to do, and as long as we're happy and enjoying what we're doing, that's what matters.
Well, you mentioned End of Days and Trinity, and both those guitar riffs really jumped out to me on those two songs. Like when you're, writing guitar riffs like that, and you just mentioned the two different, kind of like the more heavy style or the more melodic pop style, do you have to get your mindset in one way or the other, or is it just kind of whatever's coming out naturally at that moment?
As I'm writing, I have that in mind. So in other words, if I write a song like End of Days, it might take me 2, 3, 4 hours of a day to write that song musically and have it completed. And then when I wake up the next morning with a cup of coffee and I'm ready to write another song, I say to myself, okay, so I've got two metal tracks and I've got one mid-tempo, riffy, groove oriented track. So now let's do a poppier track and I'll write a song like Grateful. I purposely try to interweave, those different styles and, just stretch out a little bit and try different things. I was never a fan personally of albums, some of the albums from the 80s where literally every song sounded kind of like a continuation of the song you heard before that.
Yeah.
That's not my thing. I like when bands mix it up a little bit and they give you different flavors along the way to sample, to try. And I love that. I get bored easily. I have ADHD. I joke about it all the time, but I lose focus. My attention span is that of a gnat. So I literally, when I'm listening to music, it's similar. It's always been that way. If I get bored, I move on to another album or another band. And I like the bands that keep my interest peaked.
A couple other tracks on this album that really jumped out at me were the title track, When We Were Kings, and Betrayed by Love. I just really, kind of dug the feel of Betrayed by Love. It's like a ballad, but it felt a little bit more dark than a typical Stryper song. And I don't know,
Right.
kind of talk a little bit about that one, where that track came from.
Well, yeah. I mean, again, that's the song I felt as I was writing. I need something that's more of a ballad, guitar heavy riff kind of groove, but not syrupy. And I started working on that groove of Betrayed by Love. To me, that's the ballad of the album. Another song that might be comparable is the song Rhyme of Time. Those two are probably the ballads of the album. They're guitar heavy not piano heavy. What's interesting about Betrayed by Love lyrically is it's on the darker side. It's not a necessarily a make you feel good song. It's I think people expect that of Stryper, but this song, Betrayed by Love, is referring to and talking about being betrayed by love, which we all have been. Whether it's a relationship or a family member, a friend, a sibling, whatever, coworker, but we've been betrayed. You trust someone, you love them, and then they betray you. And this is human nature. We're all flawed. And it's a song that I felt needed to be written from my perspective, almost like a therapeutic kind of way of dealing with things sometimes. And that's one of my favorite tracks on the album. There's actually a music video coming to that song and for that song, as well as When We Were Kings, which is the title track. Probably my favorite track on the album. I love the groove of that. Stryper's never done a groove like that, kind of a swing, down, boom, 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 it's got that swing to it. And I love the fact that we did something like that. I always wanted to, and that song just feels right to me.
Well, you mentioned, When We Were Kings, and it's being your favorite track on the album. Is that kind of like what pushes a song to be in the title track, or do you come up with the title for an album previous to writing the song, basically?
Well, this time around, there was not a title track or a title for the longest of times. I kind of threw that name out there and everybody liked it, but we didn't settle on it. And once we settled on it, that's when I finished the lyrics to that song, because I wasn't sure if we were going to name the album that or have a song that was titled that. But again, once we said, hey, yeah, that's great, let's go with that, I kind of ran with that and finished the lyrics. But, it's just talking about, it's us reminiscing about the glory days in a positive way, not a negative, woe is me, how sad it is. It's not like that. It's more like, guys, remember when we were, selling out, packing arenas, and White Lion was opening for us, and we were awarded a platinum album, and man, that was the peak. That was amazing. That's when we were kings. Just kind of sitting around having coffee or drinking a beer and talking about, reminiscing about the good old days.
With this being the 40th anniversary, is that kind of intentional? When We Were Kings and Grateful. I know songs are, subjective to whatever, but is Grateful kind of the same sense of like looking back 40 years with the fans and that kind of thing?
Yep, absolutely. Grateful is another song, just basically pouring out my heart, saying, man, I'm grateful for what I have. And, it's real easy for us to complain about what we don't have.
Yeah.
But man, it's harder to be grateful for what you do have. And even in the smallest of things, it's fancy cars, big homes, $1 million in the bank doesn't make you happy. It really doesn't. And some people would say, oh, well, it'll make me happy. We all joke about it.
Yeah.
It doesn't, because with that comes responsibility that sometimes a lot of people can't handle. And also with that comes a lot of other liabilities, more taxes, more things to have to deal with. Once it's gone, how do you keep paying for the things you bought with that money, paying your taxes, your property taxes, your whatever? Can you afford that for the rest of your life? And then if you can't, it's a heavy burden to carry, and a lot of people can't carry it, and it becomes this weight and a negative. So, be happy with what you have. Be grateful for what you have, and that's what that song is all about.
Well, talking again about, the heaviness of a song like End of Days. Stryper's always been heavy, going back to the 80s, but, over the past, all these albums over the past 10, 15 years, have even a bit of a heavierness to them. So I'm like, what kind of pushed your writing in that direction? Was it just a natural progression, you think?
Natural progression. I always want to get the heavy in there as well as the melodic, as well as the lay back and chill kind of song. It's important for me to really mix it up as I'm writing, and that's the thinking. And I'll go back if I have 7 or 8 songs. I'll go back and say, I got 2 or 3 heavies, and I've got a couple pops, but I don't have enough mid tempos. Like, for example, Unforgivable. To me, that's a mid tempo. You know, it's got that mid groove. Those songs are just as important as the heavy songs. As a matter of fact, even more important, because the majority prefers those kind of songs, the mid tempo songs. So I really always try to mix it up properly and have bookends. If you notice, the album starts with the bang, and that's just kind of what let's come out and let's go out swinging. Um, and I call them bookends. But it's just everything like that is important. You got to think through and everything in order and know what you're doing when you're making an album. And we really try hard to do that.
I mean, when it comes to songwriting, having always been the primary songwriter for Stryper, whenever you work with a guy like George Lynch or Tracy Guns, like how is the process different for you as a writer?
Well, it's very different. I mean, I've always been the primary writer for Stryper and obviously for my solo stuff. But, when I decided to start doing other projects like Sweet and Lynch and Sunbomb, I always thought to myself, if I'm going to do side projects with other guys, I want to make sure that I step back a little bit so that they can see George and Michael Sweet. I don't want it to sound like a Stryper album completely. You're always going to have those flavors where people say, "Oh yeah, that sounds like Stryper because I'm singing or I'm co-writing." But I try to really mix it up so it doesn't sound just like a Stryper album. That's why it's important that George. People say, "Why don't you play guitar in Sweet Lynch?" I'm like, "Well, you got George Lynch. He's an incredible player, and if I start playing guitar, it's going to start sounding more like Stryper. You're going to hear that Stryper tone, the Michael Sweet tone, and it's just going to start taking on more and more of that Stryper sound. And I try to stay away from that when I'm doing side projects with other guys.
For instance, like in Sunbomb, Light Up the Sky, that album just came out last month, or I think it was June. Like,
Yep.
talk about working with Tracy Guns, because I mean he's one of those guys that's always, everybody knows Tracy Guns, but I feel like he still doesn't get the respect he deserves as an old timer, the way George Lynch does. So like, what's your feelings on like working with him and how the two, Sunbomb albums have come out?
Well, I mean, working with Tracy's been great. Working with George has been great. Yeah. We don't share the same views always, right. Spiritually or politically or just in general. But at the same time, it's a brotherhood. We are brothers, and we're musicians, and we grew up on the same in the same scene, and we have a lot in common. And I think because of that comes a lot of respect. At least I hope so. I certainly respect those guys. I hope they respect me. And it's great working with them. I think Tracy and George are kind of, from my perspective, kind of at the same point in terms of, being rated. They're kind of both underrated, in my opinion. Obviously they've accomplished a lot and have achieved a lot, but they're not at that level of some of the guys like Eddie Van Halen and Randy Rhoads and some of those guys. They're at a whole different level, and I think they should be. I mean, and this might sound super egotistical, and that's okay, but it's the truth. Sometimes I feel like I'm underrated as a guitar player. A lot of people don't even know that I play, and it just makes my head spin. When people come to a Stryper show and after the show say, "Man, we didn't even know you played," and I'm like, okay. I'm playing guitar in every video. So I think because of that, I'm the singer. I feel like I'm a little underrated as a player. Yeah, I have really bad signal here. My apologies. I was just going to say, who cares in terms of where you're rated on the scale of here or here. we're all accomplishing stuff. We've all done great things over the years, uh, and we have nothing to prove at all. At all. If it were to all in today, we've got nothing to prove. Tracy, George, myself, uh, but it is a true honor to play with those guys and to be making music with those guys and releasing albums, and it's just a real blessing and a real honor.
Well, mentioning, Light Up the Sky, one of my favorite tracks that have come out this year is Beyond the Odds. I just really love your vocals on that, just the whole style, the whole vibe of that song.
Well, good. Thank you, man. I'm glad. And I'm trying to remember how that song goes.
I'm not even going to
It's like
attempt.
you start recording a lot of albums and a lot of music, and it becomes a whirlwind, and you start thinking, which song is that? Yeah,
Yeah.
it's this album is, I think, a perfect follow up to the first album. I think it's maybe even a more rounded album, maybe even a little better, a little stronger. And hopefully there will be a third. We'll see how that goes. And then same with Sweet Lynch. We just released our third album. Maybe there'll be a fourth. We kind of always play it by ear to see how it goes.
Kind of playing off that, not remembering the song and all that, because I mean, you've been like prolific as could be over the past 10, 15 years between, Stryper, your solo work, Sweet and Lynch, Sunbomb, Iconic, everything. You've 15 plus albums over the past decade. Like, what is it that, keeps your drive going to constantly create like that?
Well, that's a good question. I think it's just who I am and how I'm made. I'm a real overachiever, go getter. I always joke about my ADHD, and I'm OCD as well. Everything has to be in its place and be perfectly in its place. And once it is, I can focus on that, hyper focus. That's the ADHD. So I can hyper focus on stuff and I can get stuff done. I work really well under pressure. I love the pressure of more, give me more, give me more. And with more, it makes me somehow get it done. Versus if I'm not doing more, I'm just kind of, I could fall into a trap and not want to get stuff done. So it's important for me to continue working. And George and I think are in a race to see who winds up winning the title of the hardest working man in rock and roll. We'll
Yeah.
see who it is. It's either George or me. It's one of the two.
Yeah.
You put us together, and we definitely win the prize. We're hard workers, and we do a lot. So pretty cool.
Yeah. Personally, I think there's a lot to be said for, a band like Stryper going on your 40th anniversary tour, but, the tour is off a new album, not just off of nostalgia, like, 99% of the bands would do in that case.
Yes, absolutely. Although there are certain songs in the set we play every tour, songs like
Yeah.
"To Hell with the Devil," "Soldiers Under Command," but absolutely. I mean, you can't just. I don't understand personally those bands that have no desire to make new music. I've heard bands say it's not worth it. I don't really understand that. It's not worth what? It like, you know, expressing yourself, uh, creating art. It's not worth what? And I assume when they say something like that, they mean it's not worth it financially. But I never got into this for the finances ever. I expected to not make any money. When I was a kid and I started making music, I never thought I'd make any money. When I got my first royalty check, I was still living at home in bunk beds with my brother. I hadn't moved out of the house yet. And I walked out to the mailbox and got my first royalty check from Bug Music for the first album. And it was like 38,000 and change. And I thought, man, if this is all I get, I'm good with that. Wow.
Yeah.
It just never was about the money for me. And then as you get older, you realize you've got bills to pay and responsibilities and things to take care of, people to take care of. And then you realize, well, to a degree, it has to be about the money. But at the same time, I'm kind of going on a tangent here. I don't understand the mentality of bands that give up on making new music. It's sad. That's so sad, man. Find that love again and keep making music till you die. I mean, that's why you were created, was to make music.
Yeah, I agree. There's several bands out there that I wish would just put out an album, whether it's gonna
Yeah,
sell anything or not, just put it out there. Yeah.
absolutely. Now, if they're broke up and they're
Right.
not together,
Yeah.
that's one thing.
Yeah.
But if they're together and they're out there touring and they just keep playing the same songs over and over again and they don't put out an album but every 20 years or something, wow. What do you say about that? That's kind of sad.
Yeah. As someone who's been doing this for 40 plus years, like you've seen technology change wildly in the recording studio. Also being a producer and everything, do you enjoy it now, with, all the advancements in technology, or do you miss kind of the old days, the old process or anything?
I miss the old days in the sense that, every album was done in the studio with the band versus all this remote recording stuff nowadays. One guy tracks his parts and the next sends it off to the next guy in an email with a link, and he opens up the tracks and he does his part and sends it to the next guy. And the camaraderie of being in the same place at the same time, there's something to be said for that. That's why Stryper, I think, has the upper edge often, is because we do it in the same studio. We go into the same studio and we're there for about 2 to 3 weeks, usually pushing 3 weeks, and we rehearse all the songs, learn them, and then record all the basic tracks, everything except lead vocals and lead guitar solos. So I think you hear that on the tracks themselves. There's an energy that comes from that you can't create when you're all individually away from one another in different states doing it remotely. You can't capture that.
The other side of that, with today's technology, do you think it's crazy that just like any random person, can put together a song in 10 minutes and throw it on the internet for the world to hear, and there's not much of a kind of a process for that to go to? Or does that matter? I guess if it's good music, it's good music. Yeah.
Well, I mean, it does matter because there's some great AI music, but nobody wrote it but a computer. So
Yeah.
it does matter. The human touch is fading, and that's very concerning. That is not good for music or art in general. When you just type in a few words and say, show me this, give me this, create this, and then boom, in 2 seconds you've got it. Mm-mm. That's where we're at, and I think we're at a point now where you don't know what's real and what's not, what's human and what's AI. You don't know. We won't know.
Yeah.
Music is changed forever, and then people call you old for thinking that way. Oh man, you need to get with the times. You're old school. You're an old fart. Come on, man. It's like, really? Okay. If other people don't care about that, wow. It's like music, art, it should be created by humans from the heart, not a computer. And I think just so many people are going down that road, and it's going to be interesting to see where we're at in 10 years with music and the arts and film and all that stuff, man. It's mind boggling. I don't think it's a good thing.
Yeah. Same. It's kind of scary when it comes to, just how easy someone, believes something they see on their screen.
Yeah, exactly. And I mean, I've heard stuff. I thought, oh wow, this is cool. What band is it? And they're like, it's AI. I'm okay. It's good. It's really good. You're sitting there going, yeah. But geez, I don't know why that doesn't scare more people than it does.
Absolutely. Bringing it back to, Stryper here for a final question. To Hell with the Amps also came out this year. Were there any tracks on, that you really wanted to, or that were considered, but just didn't relate to acoustic as well as you thought they would? Or how was your process on doing that?
Well, for me, when I was going through the songs, trying to figure things out, it had to be about what I could sing passionately and feel comfortable singing acoustically. That was electric prior to that. Um, and we only wanted to do songs that translated to acoustic great. Certain songs that you might not expect were written on acoustic guitar, and they're metal tracks. Like No More Hell to Pay. It was written on an acoustic guitar, and you're thinking, "Wow, okay." It's easy for me to grab an acoustic and write a song, and then pick up the electric next day and finish it. So that what it means is it makes it easy to pick up an acoustic guitar down the road and play that song live on an acoustic guitar. It just somehow works. And a lot of the Stryper songs work. Certain songs don't. Like you try to play a song like Yahweh on acoustic, that might be kind of weird because there's so many parts to it, single note harmony, guitar sections, and that can be kind of weird. But we chose the best songs, I think, and it worked really well. The album turned out great, and then we did a tour, and it turned out great as well.
Yeah, I really dug the rendition of Amazing Grace as well. Do you happen to have like a favorite version of that you've heard throughout your life?
Oh man, there's so many. And I actually thought before we recorded that, I thought, how do we do this? Because there's been so many great versions.
Yeah.
So how do we do a version that's equally as great and stands on its own merit? And I just felt like, let's just do it from the heart, sing it with conviction. And I call it an anointing. If a song has an anointing, it moves you, and you don't know what's moving you, but boy, it's just powerful. Comes all over you, and makes you feel like it moves all over you. It makes you feel electrified. So that's an anointing. And I feel like that version of Amazing Grace has an anointing on it. When you hear it, whether you like gospel or not, it just makes you go, whoa, what's that? Let me turn that up. I want to hear that. It's kind of cool.
All right, man. Well, I really appreciate you taking the time with me today. I'm absolutely loving When We Were Kings and looking forward to seeing you live again down the road.
Thanks, brother. Really nice talking to you. Thanks for taking the time, and hopefully we'll see you out on the road, okay? And meet you in person. See you in person. God bless you, man. Stay well, stay out of trouble, and keep smiling, all right?
There you go, Michael Sweet of Stryper. A huge thank you to John Freeman of Freeman Promotions for his continued support of this podcast. And of course, a massive thank you to Michael Sweet of Stryper for taking some time out there to talk to me. I'm sure you heard there was a couple points, 2 or 3 points in the interview where his voice cut out a little bit, but thankfully it was only for a few seconds, 10 seconds at a time maybe. As he said there early on, he was kind of in a remote area, so the internet wasn't the greatest, but it was enough to get this done. And to me, this was a big honor. This is one of those guys that I've, just loved how well he's maintained his voice. Like I said at the beginning, how great this guy still sounds live. How consistent he is in his writing when it comes to Stryper, his solo music, and of course everything he's done with George Lynch now. Those 3 albums, phenomenal. Of course, the 2 Sunbomb albums, that iconic album. This guy is just an endless supply of great music. If you're a fan of him, and if you're still listening to this, I imagine that you have to be, right? So, with that being said, When We Were Kings is out now. It came out this past Friday. Another great album from Stryper. So go check that out, pick it up, hit up Stryper on one of these shows. They're on their 40th anniversary now. 40 years of Stryper. And like we said there towards the end of that interview, they're out there on their 40th anniversary, in support of this album. Where most bands, especially when they get to this point, or especially when it's an anniversary, especially an anniversary this far into it, it's just a celebration, of every song that you hear us play at every other show. So at least with Stryper here, we're getting new music as well that's absolutely great, just as good as the old stuff. And speaking of the old stuff there, they had, those re-records in the acoustic vein earlier this year with To Hell With The Amps. Check that out as well. Check out all his solo stuff, Sweet and Lynch, everything I just said. So, such an honor for me to be able to talk to this guy. I've always appreciated how, strong he is in his faith and his opinions, but how open and understanding he is of other people's opinions, especially those that completely believe the exact opposite of him. This guy, like he said in the interview there about Tracy Guns or George Lynch, he may not have the same mindset and views when it comes to faith and religion or when it comes to politics or anything, but they're still, respect each other in the music world and as human beings. And I've never, gone into a thing like this on this podcast, but I just absolutely love that when I say that, that's what this world needs. There's been so much division over the past decade, and, it just seems to get worse every year because of politics and religion and just world things going on in this world. And so many people use social media to divide each other and fall, friendships and families, just on the outs with each other because of politics or religion. I can get it with religion in some people's sense, but even that, it's like you've got to respect what people believe as long as they're not hurting others. That's religion to me. Love, that's the end of the day. I don't know, I don't have an ending there. There's my ending. Michael Sweet, thank you. Thank you to everybody listening. If this is your first time listening and you're a fan of the 80s genre that Stryper, had its heyday in, well, guess what? There's been a ton of artists from that genre on this podcast the past 403 episodes. I want to throw one out real quick. If you're into faith-based music, King's X, is an all-timer in that, not just that department, but any department. 3 of the finest musicians ever in one band right there. It's kind of like, Rush in a sense. Of course they didn't have the, the level of success as Rush, but they've had more success than most bands and they deserve way more than they've got. King's X is phenomenal, and Ty Tabor has been on this podcast before. I've also had on Frank Cannon from Tesla multiple times, Brian Wheat from Tesla, Gene Simmons from Kiss, Bruce Kulick, formerly of Kiss. When we're talking about great voices like Michael Sweet, one of the greatest voices in the history of rock and roll, in my opinion, is Glenn Hughes. He has been on this podcast twice. I've had on Dee Snider, Jeff Tate, Dizzy Reed of Guns N' Roses, Vivian Campbell of Def Leppard and Dio. I've had on members of Firehouse, Trickster, Lillian Axe, Junkyard, Kix. Mark Slaughter has been on here. I could keep going. Members of Megadeth, Testament. It got real heavy with guys from Black Dahlia Murder. Recently had on C.J. Pierce of Drowning Pool for the 3rd time. We've had on Adrian Vandenberg recently. Keith Wallen, the guitarist of Breaking Benjamin. Jason Todd, the former guitarist of Shinedown, has been on here. The genres are, all over the place. Three Doors Down, Hellstorm, Trapped, Motley Crue, members of Billy Idol and Alice Cooper. Like I said, the list is great. Dig through there. You can find it anywhere podcasts are heard. You can find it at the website, thethunderunderground.com, and listen directly there. If you didn't know exactly where to go, just go to Google and type in Thunder Underground. The song by Ozzy Osbourne will come up probably first, and then right after that should be this podcast. Wherever you listen to this, hit like, subscribe, or follow so you don't miss future episodes, such as an episode with Kurt Deimer is coming up next. Kurt is a newer artist. He's only been around for a few years now, but he's already been opening and out on the road with acts like Tesla, Queensryche, but Jeff Tate of Queensryche. See, there are 2 bands that have been on this podcast. Yngwie Malmsteen, he's toured with him before, and he's touring with him again here in a couple months, and one of those shows will be right here in Tulsa, Oklahoma. So if you're listening to this and you're in this area and you're going to Yngwie, get out there early enough to see Kurt Deimer. Not Diamond, Deimer. So all that being said, follow us on our socials pretty much everywhere. Also on TikTok now, releasing videos. There'll be one here from this Michael Sweet interview on TikTok probably by the time you hear this podcast. So follow on TikTok as well. Anytime you see a social post, whether it be Instagram, Facebook, Twitter, TikTok, if you can like it, comment on it, or share it, that's the easiest free way to support this podcast. That's absolutely appreciative, because as soon as you do that, it helps, those algorithms, you've heard that word, it helps spread it around so other people will get the chance to see this podcast that, might be a fan of Michael Sweet or someone else that's been on this podcast recently. You know who else has been on this podcast? Vernon Reed and Corey Glover of Living Color. two of the greatest musicians in the history of rock and roll. Right there. I just had to throw that in because it just popped in my head for some reason. All right. I'm going to quit rambling and get out of here. And let you know, like I said, Kurt Deimer's coming up. Lots of other great things are coming up that'll be announced soon. But until then, a huge thank you to Freeman Promotions, Sunset Tattoo, DEB Concerts, and Michael Sweet. And until next time.
Thunder Underground, y'all.